What's up, y'all? And welcome to another video, BadNewsBrown. And in this video, I'll be speaking about a little Black history. Being that it's Black History Month, people's eyes tend to be a little more open. So I figure I hit y'all with a little bit of history. And another thing, because especially in these last few generations, in my opinion, or probably always been like that. When we see notable people in history, we may know them by name, even by face, but we really don't too much know their story or what they really stood for. Especially a lot of us, we heard of the people, may know a little bit, but we really don't too much know. And this is the importance of people like me telling the true story, or how should I put it, from the horse's mouth, or how we feel about the situation, as opposed to, like I always say, allowing Hollywood to do so. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about Marcus Garvey and the UNIA movement. Now, you may have heard of Marcus Garvey before, but do you really know what he stood for? And this video, of course, is going to be in a nutshell. I'm not going to really get into detail about every single move or moment in his life, but I want to kind of give y'all a general understanding of who he was and what he stood for. So here I go. Now, Marcus Garvey was born in the 1800s, the late 1800s, I believe like in the 1880s. And again, y'all gotta know this was not maybe 20 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, supposedly freeing slaves. So it was still a lot, just like now, it was still a lot of racism. But in particular, at that time, there wasn't really a whole bunch of immigrants like it is now. It was really just because, unfortunately, a lot of the Native Americans had already been killed off and restricted to certain reservations. Not all. It was still a lot going on still, but for the most part. So really it was just mainly just black free slaves and the whites. So with that being said, a lot of the whites felt that, well, hey, since the majority of the blacks got all the skills because they didn't pretty much build this country, we need to figure out a way to try to curb his upward mobility as far as him living his life, so to speak. I'm just going to put it like that, but we know what I'm talking about. So they had movements like the Ku Klux Klan, which was basically sent to terrorize black people so they wouldn't go out and live their life and obtain the so-called American dream. So anyway, Marcus Garvey, born in Jamaica, he was educated. His parents, I don't think they were too wealthy. I'm not sure, I could be mistaken, and that should prompt y'all to go look it up. But anyway, in a nutshell, he had his own shipping company, and he basically was saying, well, hey, since we free now, let's go back home. And that was his overall premise, but there's a lot more to it than that, because just like now, a lot of us in general had a real low self-esteem. So his whole movement, the UNIA, was about self-love, loving who you are, from your skin complexion, your culture, everything. So, and again, at this time, this was in Harlem, New York. And I'm going to do another thing about the Harlem Renaissance. Matter of fact, I'm going to speak on it now because Marcus Garvey movement was so big, and you should see the marches and the whole they wasn't protesting, they wasn't yelling or nothing. They was just marching down the street by the thousands of us, and just really just celebrating who we are. Not not on no buffoonery or nothing. But again, just a quick note, I want to speak about the Harlem Renaissance, because the Harlem Renaissance, although, how should I put it, how beneficial it may have appeared or been, it actually was an incentive, in my opinion, by the establishment to try to keep the black man in America instead of going back to Africa. Because we had our own ships. You got to think, Marcus Garvey had his own shipping company, so he wasn't just talking. And a lot of us was with it, and a lot of us wasn't, because it was a strong boule class back then, and a lot of them was used to double cross Marcus Garvey in a nutshell. But back to that Harlem Renaissance, because they strongly put the emphasis on that. And a lot of people don't know that whole Harlem Renaissance, all that was just to try to incentive, like I said, to try to keep the black man in America. Because if he went back, who knows? Well, we already know we would have just built it back up mightier than we built the U.S. And this ain't no, just a disclaimer, this ain't no black reverse racism that I'm talking about. This is true history. And like, again, I ain't responsible for the racism. The burden of proof is not on us. And again, so back to the story. The movement was so big, and it's funny because even when they was marching in Harlem, the Irish woman is quoted saying, just to think the Negroes would get their freedom before we would. And that's a powerful statement, because then at that time, of course, they start bringing in Irish and Italian immigrants, hence the mob and the mafia. And all that, I'll get into that probably another video, because in hindsight, and it still works to this day, that's why we got this whole immigrant thing going on now. And again, like I said, I got nothing against nobody want to come to America, the country we built, to live a better life. But it's a lot more to it than that. But I'm going to leave that right there. And again, the self-love. And I advise y'all to really listen to Marcus Garvey's speeches and things such as that, because you can really see it was a point in his life to whereas, I ain't gonna say he was getting discouraged, but people would come to him asking him stuff. What about this? What about that? And he was just like, man, I wrote many times on that subject. You already know how I feel about this or feel about that. Quit asking me about that. So, but again, you gotta understand, it was a lot of backdoing going on, and he also had a disagreement with with W.E.B. Du Bois, but I think it was Booker T at the same time, where Booker T was advocating, hey man, let's stay here, get trades, etc., businesses and all that, which on the surface sound good, but in hindsight, we already know it was how should I put it, double cross Trojan horse move. But same with W.E.B. Du Bois, the majority of W.E.B. Du Bois, he spent his life kind of going back and forth with Marcus Garvey, but towards the end, long after, unfortunately, he finally realized. But this was after, kind of like how Martin Luther King felt like afterwards, like, damn, I helped integrate my people into a burning house. But again, y'all, this Black History Month, really want to commemorate the legacy of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA movement, and I advocate everybody to research that movement, because when we tend to think movements, to think the mob mentality as far as just protesting and yelling down the street and tearing stuff up. But no, movements is a lot more organized, just like with the Black Panther Party is a lot more organized, and it's not like what you would think in the movies. It's actually doing good. And I just want to put that disclaimer out there, because the whole UNIA movement, when you seen them marching, it wasn't like, again, like I said, they wasn't out there protesting, screaming for rights or nothing. It was just, we just out here. We looking good, we loving who we are, and we out here marching. Now, certainly, of course, he had speeches, and all his speeches was really built on self-love. It wasn't hate at all. So again, I want to re-emphasize that just in case 10, 20 years down the line we see a movie on him and it's some whole other shit. And Hollywood good for it, but again, research the UNIA movement, start listening and reading some of his speeches. Just even just for Black History Month, just start getting it in your mind. But it's really more so for the kids. So if your kid want to know who Marcus Garvey was, that's what you kind of tell them in a general way. That he was an educated brother out of Jamaica, owned his own shipping company, like the ships y'all see, and being that since we was just freed, he advocated we go back to Africa. And he had a big movement based on loving who you are, loving who we are. And he even quoted back then, you got to think, this is like 120 years ago. This ain't that long ago. He was even telling the mothers to start buying black dolls for the girls and stuff. It's all about image. So think about that, y'all. This Bad News Brown breaking this shit down one time real quick for y'all. And of course, I'll be back. Peace.